right now I want to open it up to discussion. So if you've participated into the, if you have any questions for the speakers or would like to talk about the topics that we discussed this evening, please feel free to unmute yourself. And if you have any issues, just let me know and I'll unmute you. And we'll open it up. I know, Brett, you said you might have some questions to kick us off with this time. Is there anything that comes to mind right now that you want the group to address?
I was just curious about the lawsuit, but Syra basically just answered all the questions because I wrote about it when it first happened, but I haven't really heard much about it since then. So the question I had actually was answered already. So I can think of another one while other people go.
Mike, do you have any questions that you want to discuss at this point?
Sure. I mean, one of the
Your audio is very low, Mike.
yeah, I'm double muted. Just, why not? How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think just the questions about moderation of speech on the social media platforms. I'd be interested in anybody's comments on that. I'm not super familiar with the Santa Clara principles, but I don't know if Nash or Sarah want to speak to that. I mean, my talk was a little tongue in cheek and I took some liberties since it's a ethics and tech event and comedy is always welcome. But I think, I was also trying to acknowledge that, much as I like beating up on Facebook, it's also a difficult problem to have so much speech being moderated by these private sector companies, even if they had the best of intents, which I don't think they necessarily do. I think they have, profit making intent for the most part. But yeah, just any comments or thoughts about that?
Well, one of the things that I want to ask about is the algorithms used by companies like Facebook and how they post and promote content. It seems a lot of the content that we post, for whatever reason, doesn't get promoted and it doesn't get that much views because some of it is critical of big tech. Actually, a lot of it is. So I'm just curious on, if you can share with us what your views in towards the algorithms used by these big media companies and platforms in promoting content.
Well, I will start with and I'll try to address them both at once, which is to say that the algorithms I know over the course of the time that I've been using Facebook, the algorithms have changed innumerable times, and as far as like what they're focusing on or what it's lifting up, and so I think to answer the question more generally, the problem it's less of what is the algorithm that they're using right now today, as opposed to the lack of transparency about the algorithm or about their platform moderation practices, right? And the idea that if a user has all the information and it's transparent to them and they can understand, okay, this is what's happening on this platform, right? And if I don't like this platform, then I should be able to go to a different platform, right? Unfortunately, because of the size and the control that Facebook has, it's really difficult, right? And not only is it difficult in that all of my friends are on Facebook, right? And so if I go to the other place now, I can go to Mastodon, I can go to the federated model of the day, but I'm not going to have the same opportunity for reach there, right? And even if I organize all of my friends, the hurdle of getting all of the information and the friends list and the data and all of your stuff and moving it over to someplace else and being able to exercise that, into the power of the purse, if you will, and the purse being your eyes in this situation, right? 'Cause you're not paying for Facebook, but they are making money off of your eyes on those things. It makes it very difficult. So one of the answers is data portability, right? And being able to take your information and be able to move it easily over onto the other platform, and in so doing, increasing the competition, right? Increasing the motivation for Facebook to actually empower the users. right? Another way of empowering the users is also to make their policies really transparent and to make it clear, like how many people posts have you taken down? Why did you take them down? Was there an appeals process? How was the appeals process initiated? Was there, if the initial ruling wasn't acceptable, then what else can I do? And so Mike mentioned the Santa Clara principles, and if folks, and I'm gonna be very transparent that I'm cheating right now and looking at the Santa Clara principles, right? So if folks want to look along with me, you can go to santaclaraprinciples.org. And right now, I should also say that they're the group of folks and the group of organizations, which EFF is just one of, that created them, are also now in a process now, a few years after initially releasing them, of reevaluating, are they still the appropriate principles? And there was a number of interviews with people from across the world last year to help us kind of refocus and decide, are they still applicable, or should they be addressed, and should they be modified? The first one is companies should publish the numbers of posts removed and accounts permanently or temporarily suspended due to violations. With the second one being, companies should also provide notice to each user whose content is taken down or account is suspended about the reason for the removal or the suspension. And I should say before this that when we've reached out to them, they have addressed it. But in the last year, I've seen more than a couple of posts that have been taken down, and even on Twitter, right, where like they're saying your message was taken down, and then the reasoning was blank, right? And it's like, well, so how do I even appeal whether or not it was right or not if I don't even know why it was taken down, right? And again, I want to say that when we've reached out to them, they have addressed it and corrected it. But you shouldn't have to have someone at EFF that you can reach out to do that, right? It should be very clear and transparent for the user. And also, companies should provide a meaningful opportunity for timely appeal of any content or suspicion. So human review by a person, not an automated system, and understand also that, all of these things, all of the platforms are horrible at content moderation. And the reason that they're horrible at content moderation is because it's not easy, right? There's a lot of things to juggle. There's, the trauma of the people that have to actually moderate the platforms and the content, right? Versus like the automated systems that, if I mention the word black or I mention the word white, and I'm talking about I'm making a white supremacist comment, or I'm making a comment about the harms of oppression and how we can work collectively to overcome them, and how our liberation is collective or it's non-existent, an automated system might see those as the same, right? And so really, how do we balance like the need to protect individuals from trauma with also the need to actually have effective systems, right? And then an opportunity to present additional information that will be considered in the review. Maybe contextually, what you said within the context of where you live and the community that you're in has a very different meaning or very different understanding than other communities, right? So how do you actually provide that information in a meaningful way? So all this to say, and then, and obviously what Mike spoke to earlier brilliantly was also around the recent Facebook decision to no longer have, political ads, right? Also, but which also, when we talk about the lack of transparency, also like, who's deciding what a political ad is, right? And also in understanding that, and I think there's some great arguments for not having political ads. I get it. There's some great arguments, but there's also the idea that like, if you are a newer candidate, right, who's trying to come in and like create an alternative to some of the entrenched, political, figureheads, you're not going to have the same kind of money to pay for television advertising. You're not going to have the same kind of money to pay for print advertising. So what do? What does that decision mean for you? What does it mean for the fact that like Facebook is the platform that it is, and not having equitable access to it will have a solidifying effect on the current existence of power, right? And great so point. There's so much, there's really so much there, and none of them are doing it well, but I think that we really need to, we're always, like, one of the things I really appreciate about EFF is we're always trying to think about what are the unintended consequences, right? And so it's really about merely taking the time, but the brilliant thing about the Santa Clara principles is that they're so simple, but transparency and a meaningful opportunity for engagement is what they're all about. And like, if we can start there, we can really build awesome things on top of that.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the areas that I want to talk about around surveillance was the work that's being done in Minneapolis around facial recognition ban. Nash, would you mind talking a little about, what they were able to accomplish in Minneapolis?
Sure. So I want to say about 3 weeks ago, and I think it became official about 2 weeks ago, we worked closely with our Electronic Frontier Alliance partner there, which is Restore the Fourth Minnesota, as well as the ACLU of Minnesota, in passing a unanimous passing a face surveillance ban in the city of Minneapolis, which is now, I think we're well over a dozen now in face surveillance. We started, San Francisco's was passing San Francisco's ban on face surveillance as part of our community control of police surveillance in San Francisco was the first one, and then Oakland followed, Berkeley followed, and now Massachusetts may have more numbers than us in California now. We have to catch up. As well as, and so Minneapolis is just the newest member of the team of cities that have protected their residents from the particularly pernicious surveillance of face recognition technology. And I say that it's particularly pernicious because even if, I think that folks are probably really aware at this point of the disparate efficacy of face recognition technology, the fact that, Asian folks and especially black women, so folks that are living at that intersection of the fact that the technology is bad at recognizing women and it's bad at recognizing people with darker skin. So black women, more than 100 times likely to be misidentified than a young adult white male, right? And so, so folks are aware of that efficacy, but really it's important to really point out that even if the technology worked 100% of the time, it would still be unacceptable, right? The idea that we will be that we can potentially be monitored for, when we're going to medical appointments, when we're walking with romantic partners, if we're going to, our religious institution, and the impact, if we're engaging in protest, and the impact that would have on our likelihood to do so. I know even without face recognition technology, folks may know that before I joined DFF, a lot of my work was around building legal support infrastructure for folks that were engaged in political activities. So during the Ferguson uprising, during the Baltimore uprising, after Tamir Rice was killed in Cleveland, I helped build the legal support infrastructure that helped folks to push back and to raise up their voices. And even without face recognition technology, I can tell you stories of where individuals who were arrested in protest for personally protected activity, and police then went and told their employers that they were engaged in that they were arrested at the protest, and those people lost their jobs, right? And so the idea that, so that's without face recognition technology. Now with a technology that can monitor all of us all of the time, right? So that should be unacceptable for us. And so Minneapolis, again, applauding Minneapolis on becoming the newest city to protect their residents from the harms of government use of that technology.
Great. Brett, you had a question?
Myself. Yes, for Syra, I have a question. You briefly mentioned the Board of Supervisors earlier, and I was very proud when the BOS passed the facial recognition legislation. I was wondering that since the lawsuit started, have you had any support from any members of the board or from the San Francisco Human Rights Commission or from any of the other city officials on this?
Yeah, so the Board of Supervisors definitely has taken notice of the lawsuit. In particular, after we made public that the SFPD had been able to obtain access to the business improvement district and use their camera network remotely, there were many supervisors who expressed concern about that. In fact, in response to both the blog post and the lawsuit, there was a community benefit district in the Castro that was considering adopting a network of surveillance cameras as well. And they decided to put it off after many people in the community started speaking up against it because of that concern. There was also very recently, I'm actually going to pull this up because I want to be mindful of exactly what the Board of Supervisors did. But I believe that they want to, that they passed a resolution in order to encourage certain agencies within San Francisco to provide more oversight into these business improvement districts and sort of the way that they're using their cameras and sort of what type of information they're collecting, how many requests they're receiving, that sort of thing. And that is one method of accountability to make sure that these cameras can't just be used, for whatever purpose just because they've been put up, but rather there's some sort of control over it. Now, it's not entirely satisfactory, right? Because the business improvement district is one portion of this. The bigger portion, I would argue, is the law enforcement piece of it, and the Board of Supervisors can directly regulate what law enforcement is allowed to do, particularly the police department. And so we want to make really clear that we have a ban on face recognition technology. We'd also like to see a ban on the use of remote access camera networks, live camera networks, in the way that they did so during the protests following the police murder of George Floyd. And we'd really like to see the Board of Supervisors take some action on that. Nash, I don't know if there's anything additional you want to add to that.
No, that was absolutely right. So as Saira mentioned last week, or a few weeks ago now, the Board of Supervisors unanimously voted in favor of requiring all special business districts, such as the Union Square Business Improvement District, to bring any new surveillance plans to the board before they adopt new technologies. But absolutely, it is a positive thing. But we really want to see them, hold the SFPD accountable and put the appropriate restrictions on them being able to repeat what they did.
Great.
Thank you.
Got a question or comment? I'm sorry, Mike, did you have a question or comment?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to bring up biometric data and requirements more generally. It seems to be a trend towards, of course, more and more biometric data, and I've always resisted it. But I'm concerned that it's going to be harder and harder to use technology without the provision of biometric data. So, your phone not allowing you to use a password, you have to use a fingerprint or a face, which I resist all of that, and will continue to do so. So I just curious if there's anything on the regulatory front to require tech companies to retain non-biometric access to our own devices and technologies.
So there is something so Illinois has for a while now had a bill called the Biometric Information Privacy Act, right? And with the Biometric Information Privacy Act, it says, and we're actually working, and we're in support of, I believe it's Senator Merkley's national version of the Biometric Information Privacy Act, which is a little bit stronger than the Illinois version. We'd love to see more states adopt, and we'd love to see it pass federally, really. And so, in part, what that says is it says anytime that a private entity, like a private person, corporation, wants to collect biometric information, that they need to have basically put in writing what they're collecting it for, how long they're going to retain it, who it's going to be shared with, right? And then they need to get written consent from the person for the specific use, for the specific retention period, for the specific how it's going to be shared, right? And so it's not enough to simply say, oh, like I had a sign up in front of my convenience store and it said, if you come in 50 feet, then you're consenting to use. No, that is not consent, right? It actually, you need opt-in, not opt-out, written consent to collect that information. In addition, and so which would now bring it back to Mike's question, in addition, you can't incentivize collecting the information. So you can't incentivize someone giving you that consent, which therein would say that there needs to be some other alternative way for them to use the service, right? So it can't be, oh, sorry, you can't use your phone unless you opt in to giving us this information, right? And so yeah. I think looking at the biometric, especially the federal version, the bill that's been presented federally, although the Illinois one is great, and has been really effectively used to hold Facebook accountable recently, and is being used in a lot of the Clearview cases. But the federal version does have some really important improvements. And so bills like the federal version of the Biometric Information Privacy Act that both require that informed opt-in consent and prohibit incentivization of opting into that would provide, I think, the protections that you're looking for.
Great. More of that, please. Thank you.
One additional thing that I'll do is take it out of the sphere of consumer products and put it into the sphere of government, since all of my work in particular is about combating racial and immigrant surveillance by the government. So during the Trump administration, we of course know about the horrendous attacks on immigrant communities that took place, continue to take place, obviously. But one of the things that was a little bit lesser covered compared to some of the other atrocities that we saw was the ramp up of biometric surveillance and the collection of people's personal information. So back in October, back in September of last year, there was a proposed rule that was introduced by the Department of Homeland Security to collect far more biometric information from anybody applying for an immigration benefit, including not just the person who was the applicant, but also their family members, including permanent residents, US citizens, and for the first time ever, children under the age of 14. And the types of biometrics that were proposed were things like palm prints, iris scans, facial imaging, DNA in some situations. So it really was a vast expansion of what we currently have, which is things like signatures or fingerprints, which are much more, common forms of identification or personal information that is provided to the government. And so we, EFF, wrote a rule. There are many other organizations, including immigrant rights organizations, that wrote comments against the rule and basically talked about how harmful it would be. We were very concerned that it was going to be finalized prior to the departure of the Trump administration. And thankfully, that did not happen. What I will note is that the rule, while it has been, it's not moving forward under the Biden administration. We haven't heard any plans to do so, but it hasn't been formally withdrawn. And our concern is that if it's not withdrawn, it's possible that some administration, either this one or one later down the line, could dust it off and decide to pass it through. And there were examples of this that happened where the Trump administration took like something that was a 10-year-old, 12-year-old stale rule and decided to finalize it. And we're concerned about that. So we would really love to see, especially where there's this expansion, vast expansion of biometrics collection being proposed to withdraw it, and also a commitment to not push anything like that forward. We know that oftentimes surveillance is a bipartisan issue, right? There's bipartisan support, particularly for things like biometric entry exit, like using your face as your passport. Like we've seen that happen in the airports, and we've seen some support also from both Democrats and Republicans. And so we'd really like to see this movement away from using the collection of and retention of biometric identifiers at the federal level.
Wonderful. For the sake of time, I just want to do a quick wrap, and we're going to move to comedy with your permission. I wanted to mention that we're going to have our next event on Tax Day, April 15th, focused on taxes and the environment of technology and the environment of overall environmental policies within the tech sector. So it's Tax Day. It should be a lot of fun. Get your mind off of the tax bills, and please consider joining us for April 15th for our next event.